Welcome to Advice for First and Second Year Grad Students. I'm your host, Phil Haun, and we have with us again today, Eleanor Freund, who's going to be talking to us about one of the most daunting aspects of early graduate work, which is the dreaded general exams. So anyway, Eleanor, welcome back, and tell me why in the world you picked this topic to talk about today.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. So I think you're right. I don't think there's a topic that generated more anxiety for me, and I think has a similar effect on others than general exams during the first 2 years of the program. And for everything that is said about the exams, my opinion is that it really is an important opportunity to synthesize everything you've learned, demonstrate your mastery of the subject to faculty, and set yourself up for success in picking a dissertation topic. So I wanted to help dispel some of the uncertainty surrounding generals and then offer strategies for how students in their first and second year can start preparing now and really feel good and well prepared and set themselves up for a good experience during the exams themselves.
Okay, great. So let's get into it. How did you do it and how should you do it?
Sure. So I think the first thing to say, and I think this is an important myth to dispel, I think there's a myth that people prepare for general exams the summer before the exams. And I think that's not actually true. The way you should think about it is that general prep really starts in coursework and extends over 2 years. And then the summer before generals is when you synthesize all of the information that you've already collected and learned. So I think there are things you can do in coursework that will set you up for success in generals and when you're preparing the summer before. So first, I think it's really important to have a record of everything you read and do your best to read everything that you're assigned. Now, obviously, this means reading strategically for each piece of research. You can't read every page or every word necessarily, but it is important that you identify key pieces of information for everything that you're reading. So there are some basic things you want to have note of. The first would be the research question, a summary or basic outline of the argument, the methodological approach the author uses, and then the key pieces of evidence they present, key debates in the field and where that piece of research is located in context of those debates, and then critiques of the piece and your own thoughts on it. So that would be the first thing. Make sure you have that for everything you read, because you will reference those articles when you're preparing for generals, and having written notes will save you a ton of time when you're preparing for the exam. Second, have a reference manager, and as you're reading during coursework, input each article or book that you read into that reference manager. Again, this will save you hours of time over the summer before generals. And then third, at the end of each course, you should really ask yourself, what are the key debates that have emerged in the course of the class, and where do I stand on them? Spend a day thinking about this for each course that you take while the information is still fresh. Write it down, and that will be immensely helpful to have that as a record when you go into the summer preparing for generals. And then I think it's also important to say, engage with the feedback that you get from faculty. Not only the feedback that you receive on your written work, but also the feedback you might get in personal conversations or when they submit end of semester summaries of how you've been doing. And I would say be proactive about addressing critiques that you get from faculty, especially if they're not project specific. So for example, if you're getting feedback from faculty that say you tend to overlook theoretical importance because you're too focused on a particular case that you're interested in, really hear that feedback and make an effort to address it, because these are problems that may come up over time, and you want to demonstrate that you are listening to feedback and incorporating it while you're still in coursework. So these are all things that you can do during before the summer even rolls around, where you're trying to prep for generals. So in the actual summer before general exams, I think there are a few key points I would make. So first, think about this as an opportunity to synthesize all the information you've collected and already learned. So someone once explained it to me as, the process of generals or preparing for generals is really like putting together the pieces of a puzzle. So in every course, you're handed a single piece of the puzzle. And then when you're preparing for generals, you are essentially assembling the puzzle, and you're seeing, okay, which pieces fit with which other pieces, where are pieces missing, which pieces look like they maybe don't actually reflect the overarching picture. And the process of generals is really identifying where are the pieces missing and where does the puzzle not really quite fit right. So think about it in those in those terms. And then also keep in mind that the process of preparing for general exams is a really great opportunity to start thinking about dissertation topics, which may sound very daunting, but you're spending a whole summer thinking about key debates in the field, weaknesses in existing arguments, and things theory overlooks or don't explain well, which is all great ground to find research topics. So think about where your substantive research interests lie and how those interact with the debates that you're reviewing in the field and the theories that you're reviewing, and see if you can generate some topics of interest from that. In terms of preparing for the exam itself, I would really practice outlining answers to questions. So the department will provide previous copies of exams to students. Use them. And if you look at the questions and you read them, you'll see that the same set of questions tend to appear over and over again, but in slightly different guises each time. So assume that these topics will appear on the exam, but also be prepared to address any key contemporary foreign policy topics of interest. So for example, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And more importantly, situate those topics in the context of the existing literature and be able to talk about what it is that political science research says about these issues. And then finally, as I mentioned, outline, nothing will prepare you better than having to think through your answer to a question, what you would argue, how you would make that argument, what counter arguments you would address, et cetera, within a finite period of time. That really replicates what happens on the exam itself, the written exam. And then finally, just a word on working with other people in your cohort. The dynamics of each cohort are very different, and people have very different experiences working together in the summer before generals. But what I would say is that you have to work together, regardless of how you feel about it. There is no greater resource for you than your peers in thinking through key debates and identifying flaws and weaknesses in your own logic. So you should use them as a resource. Don't try and study on your own. You will regret it later. That having been said, I do think it's important at the beginning of the summer to figure out a process that works for everyone. So come up with a schedule, come up with a process, and a format together. So assign weeks or topics to people well in advance to give them time to prepare, make expectations for preparation clear, and then leave several weeks free at the end of the summer for flex time. And I think that will help avoid a lot of the interpersonal issues that can come up when you're preparing for a very stressful exam. And I'll leave it there.
Okay, well, that's great. That last segment was my first question, which is how to approach it as a group, which I think you're exactly right. Not only does it make it, you're not doing this big task alone, you're as a group, but it can also help forge friendships that'll last a lifetime. At least that's been my experience so far. How about let's spend a little bit of time talking about the relationship between the written exam and the oral exam, because most grad students have done hundreds of written exams, very few oral exams. Mm-hmm. So what would you say about your experience?
Sure. So just to scene set on the exam, so there will be 2 days of written exams, one in each of a student's subfields, and then an oral exam with faculty who are drawn from each of the 2 subfields that students identify as being their subfields of interest. So for the written exam, each one will require responses to 3 essay questions. Each essay question will be about 7 pages long, and you'll be given a period of about 8 hours, I think it is, to complete the entire exam. So I think when students are thinking about this, the most important thing to do in terms of writing a successful exam is answer the question and have an argument. Demonstrate that you know the literature and can situate yourself within a larger context, but also address potential critiques or counter arguments in the body of your essay, and don't offer strawman arguments or counter arguments, because that will come back to bite you in the oral exam. During the exam itself, I would really recommend keeping a close watch on time and not allowing yourself to get bogged down in one particular question. On the oral exam, I think it can be extremely intimidating, but I think it's helpful to understand up front that the faculty want you to succeed. Now, that having been said, I also think you should go into the oral exam anticipating that you're going to get pushback from faculty and follow-up questions. Expect them to challenge you on the arguments you make, and try and stay calm and engage with them when they do. Make a stand when you're being challenged, but I think it's also important to be thoughtful and be humble And when you're presented with a deficiency in your argument or your logic, be honest about it. So if you think that it's important enough to call your entire argument into question, be honest about that. But at the same time, if you think it's not enough to really call what you are arguing into question, then stick to your guns and really push your argument forward. Don't stick with a weak argument past the point of reason just for the sake of arguing it. If things went poorly in any way on the written exam, I would also recommend going in and stating up front why it didn't go well and what you would have done differently. I think that can take a lot of the hot air out of the room if you feel like there's a deficiency to address. And my other piece of advice as somebody who studies China and is an area specialist, if you are known in the program for having a specific area of expertise, be prepared to demonstrate your breadth of knowledge and that you are a generalist in addition to being a specialist. So in my case, I made a real effort to only talk about China in one of the questions that I answered on the written exam, because I wanted to demonstrate I not only knew China, I knew other topics as well. And that I think really served me well. Also, go into the oral exam prepared to answer the questions that you didn't answer on the written exam. So if you read a question on the written exam and thought to yourself, there's no way I'm going to answer this question, really make an effort between the written exam and the oral exam to bring yourself up to speed on that particular question. And
okay, well, I think that's about all the time we have for today. I have to say, I wish I'd had this advice going into my general exams. But Eleanor, thank you for sharing your experience and your wisdom today on advice for grad students.
Thanks.